Today we're going to talk about how to install Jenkins plugins from the command line using the Plugin Installation Manager tool. Are you new here? If you are, welcome. And if you are new here, you don't know who I am. My name is Darren Pope, and I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees. You may have watched another video about how to install plugins from the command line using the Jenkins CLI. Now, the Jenkins CLI is fine and used to be really the only way you could install from the command line. The Plugin Installation Manager tool makes it easier for you to manage not just installing a single plugin, but sometimes full suites of plugins that you need for your controllers. Let's talk about where we're starting at today. I have a Jenkins controller version 2.277.1. To that controller, I have attached an agent with the label of Linux. What I'm going to do right now is go ahead and set up a job that has a step in it that will be provided by the plugin that we are going to install in a few moments. But I want you to see how this job fails when a plugin is missing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Create a New Item. I'm going to say Test Pipeline, and the value for my pipeline is going to be right here. And what you can see, I will go ahead and size that up, probably one more. There we go. What you can see here is a very basic declarative pipeline, has a single stage with 3 steps in it. I'm listing out the files in the workspace, I'm running a command touch, and then listing out the files one more time. Now, this touch step is the step that has not been installed yet. We are going to be installing the Pipeline Utility Steps plugin, which provides this step for us. But I want you to see what happens in the build log prior to installing that plugin. That way, if you ever have a problem in the future and you're looking at a build log, this error won't be real surprising. Let's click on Save and then click on Build Now. I'm going to size back down here. I'll go ahead and click on 1. And what we can see here is the LS, the first LS runs fine, but when we get to the touch step, it says no such DSL method touch found among the steps. And all of these steps are steps that are already available currently on this controller as already provided through other plugins. Now, unlike the Jenkins CLI, which ships inside of your controller, the Plugin Manager installation tool is a separate project. So we need to go and download that jar file. How do we do that? You can look down in the description. I have a link off to that GitHub repository. But since I already have it down in the link, I'm also going to bring it up right here. Under the Jenkins CI organization at GitHub, we have a Plugin Installation Manager tool. And you can see, at least at the time of this recording, the most recent version, the latest version, is 2.9.0. So we're going to download and install this jar file. However, the question is, where do we need to install this? Unlike the Jenkins CLI, which you can give it a URL and then you can give it credentials so it can operate against any controller that you want, the Plugin Installation Manager tool has to be installed on the controller itself. So what I have here is a shell into my controller. I am using a Vagrant box, so my user right now is Vagrant, and I'm in my home directory for Vagrant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this tool, put it on my Jenkins controller, and then we'll go from that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a make dir-p tools, and I am going to cd into the tools directory. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you, this controller is running on a CentOS 7 box. If you're using Debian, if you're using Windows, these commands are going to change, or at least the commands that we're getting ready to look at, and some of the options will change based on your operating system. When I installed Jenkins LTS on this instance, I did a yum install. So the location of all the files and directories are in the default locations specifically for a Fedora-based or anything that you're using yum install for in those locations. So keep that in mind as we also take a look at some of the documentation for Plugin Installation Manager tool. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go and download the jar file. So I'll show you how to do that. So on the releases, so I'll click on the latest release, and then I'm going to right click and let's see, copy link location. And I'm just going to do a wget and then paste that up. And lots of noise there, but basically it downloaded the jar file. If we take a look inside of tools, we can see now that I have Jenkins Plugin Manager 290. And let's go ahead and clear that up. And now we're ready to get started installing our plugin. Since we are already on our controller, we just need to know where places are. Before we get to the point like how the Jenkins CLI install plugin worked, I want to take you through what can happen with Plugin Installation Manager tool. By default, you just give it a place to download plugins. That's what Plugin Installation Manager tool does. By default, unless you tell it different, it will always just download plugins. It's not going to download the plugins directly into your Jenkins home directory /plugins. That's not what it's going to do by default. It's just going to download them where you tell them to do it, or a default location as defined in the documentation. So let's take a look at the documentation real quick. We'll go back over to GitHub, go back up to the top, and the documentation is right here in the README. So getting started, you can say download the latest Jenkins Plugin Manager jar from here and run it as shown, which is what we just downloaded. This is the jar file we just downloaded. You optionally give it a WAR file. We'll look at that in a moment. You can give it a plugin file. So you could define a text file or other types of files that has a list of the plugins that you want to install. Or you can install plugins just one by one using the -- plugins option. So in this case, -- plugins for delivery pipeline plugin and deploy it plugin. But let's get down to the CLI options here just a little bit further. We talked about the plugin file or -f, again, an optional thing. It can be a plugin's text or plugin's YAML. And in that file, you just give it a list of the plugins that you want installed. This is one of the big sections here that may confuse you a little bit. By default, since plugins are downloaded, it's going to go into a plugin download directory. Now, you can set it either with an environment variable, or if nothing is provided, if you're on Windows, it will go to C program data Jenkins reference plugins. Any other operating system, so if it's Windows, it goes to here. Anything else, it goes into user share Jenkins ref plugins. Now, that location may not exist. You may not have write permissions for that. So you'll see in our first example as we get to it that I'm going to specify a different location for the download. Again, plugins, Jenkins version. Now, what's the Jenkins version about? Well, a version of Jenkins needs to be known. And used to, this WAR file was not optional. You had to provide it. However, I still like providing it because this gives us a little bit cleaner way of doing the things that I need to do on my controller. If I'm on a controller, I know the WAR file is there. So I'm going to use that WAR file to help drive out what plugins have to be installed, what plugins don't have to be installed. That will make more sense in a few moments. So based on the OS, if you're on Windows, it's going to be looking in that location for the WAR file. Otherwise, it's going to be looking in user share Jenkins, which that WAR file in CentOS is not the location where the WAR file is installed. So I'm going to have to give it a location for my WAR file. And there's a lot of other options that I'm not going to get into right now. I just want you to understand that there are options that, based on how you want to use this tool, these options will give you the ability to sort of change how you process this. So let's look at a concrete example. So this command, java-jar Jenkins plugin manager, okay, that makes sense. I'm giving it the location of my war file. So on CentOS 7 or any Fedora-based distribution, the location of the Jenkins war file after a yum install is user lib Jenkins. If you're on a Debian-based distribution, it's a different location. So you need to understand where your war file is. In this case, I am specifying a plugin download directory of home vagrant, which is my home directory, and then plugins, which is a new directory that will be created for us automatically. And then I'm specifying the plugin I want to install is just pipeline utility steps. Now you may have noticed over in the documentation that you can give it a lot of different options. So if you were to scroll down a little bit more, you can give, where is it? Right here. I can give it, nope, that's not it. Here we go. This is what I'm talking about. So I can give it just the ID of the plugin, and it will download the latest version. Or I can give it a specific version, and it will download that version. Or I can give it a different update center if I wanted to do that. There's lots of different specifications that we can give. So based on the example looking at this, what my command will do is just give me the latest version of pipeline utility steps, which is fine for what I want in this example. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And as it runs, what's happening is it's going out based on the war file, figuring out what plugins are going to be necessary for pipeline utility steps. So if we were to take a look in, let's go back up. Let's list out what's inside of plugins. We can see here that basically at 1456, which is now, it downloaded pipeline utility steps. But it also downloaded SCM API, script security, structs, workflow API, workflow step API. These plugins are requirements for pipeline utility steps. So all of that was downloaded. Now, this is just a directory within my home directory, home vagrant. In fact, if I just cd into plugins, we can see here that that's where those are. This is not the plugins directory within my Jenkins home directory. So let's assume for a moment that everything here is correct. And by the way, it is. But here's the thing. When we run this again in a few moments, we are going to go ahead and do like what install plugin does for us for the Jenkins CLI. We are going to run this and have the plugin installation manager tool automatically put the plugin into our Jenkins home/plugins directory for us. When that happens, you'll notice that the only plugin that will be installed is pipeline utility steps, because all of these other plugins already exist and they are at the correct version for pipeline utility steps to work. Just to prove that out real quick, let's do a listing of our Jenkins home. Here, let's go and clear this up first. Let's do a listing of our var lib Jenkins plugins directory, which is the default Jenkins home directory location for a Fedora-based installation. So var lib Jenkins is Jenkins home, and plugins is underneath that. Now you can see here that currently pipeline utility steps is not installed. You can see here that the times on almost all of these plugins are around April 5th, around 1403, 1404. I'm going to list this a little bit differently. Whoops, I did that wrong. Let's do var lib Jenkins plugins. Let's scroll to the top since we sorted it in this order. And you can see here that we have a couple of plugins that were recently installed. the Checks API and LDAP. Those were installed recently, but nothing else has been installed. So let's get ready to do the installation using the Plugin Installation Manager tool to see what happens with pipeline utility steps. Okay, let's figure out where we're at. Let's get back over to our tools directory. And here's the command we're going to run. Now, first off, for people that are watching closely, you can see that I'm using sudo. My Vagrant user does not have write permissions to varlib Jenkins plugins. So I'm going to just use sudo. Maybe you change it up to root. Again, we're going to resolve that in just a few moments. I give it the location for the WAR file, but now, instead of the plugin download directory being in my home directory, just my normal user home directory, I'm now putting it inside of the Jenkins home user, or the Jenkins home directory, inside specifically the plugins directory. This is where the JPI files live, and then specifically plugins. So I'm having to do sudo in order to be able to write into that folder. All right, let's go ahead and hit enter. And after just a few moments, it's going to finish up and be silent. It just says done. So let's see what happened. Let's go back and do a listing of our plugins directory. Go ahead and scroll back up. If you remember a moment ago, the newest plugins were this LDAP and Checks API, but now you can see pipeline utility steps. You can also tell that it's owned by root. We are going to need to change the ownership of this file. Notice also what you don't see. Think back to a few moments ago when we ran the command and had the plugins just downloaded into my home Vagrant plugins directory, which is just a directory. It just happened to be named plugins. It downloaded not only the pipeline utility steps, it also downloaded 4 or 5 other plugins as well. Because we installed into a directory, the plugin download directory was specified as varlib Jenkins plugins. When the tool ran, it was able to download pipeline utility steps, put it inside of our Jenkins home /plugins directory. That all makes sense. But if you think back to home Vagrant plugins, where we had not only pipeline utility steps, we also had 4 or 5 other plugins. As the tool ran inside of the Jenkins home plugins directory, it was saying, oh yeah, I found this required plugin. The version's good, move on. So the only plugin that was actually installed during this run was pipeline utility steps. And since we can see that this plugin is owned by root, which based on read, it's probably okay, but just to be consistent, let's go ahead and change the ownership, of that to Jenkins. Now, if you've installed using a different user ID or whatever it is, a different user ID, a different group, you need to match whatever the value is of your other plugins, or you should. So now that we've done that, let's take a look at it again. We'll scroll back up. Let's only have a few here. And we can see now that pipeline utility steps is owned by Jenkins. Now, although this plugin was downloaded, correctly placed inside of our Jenkins home plugins directory, is this plugin actually active? Let's go check. So if we go back over to our controller, and we'll go to Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins, click on Installed. Let's see if it's there or not. Pipeline, utility, oh wait, it's not there. Let's go to Available. Pipeline utility steps is still showing available. So although that we have installed the HPI file into the Jenkins home plugins directory, that does not make the plugin available to us yet. And in fact, to prove that out, let's run this job one more time. We're going to see with this build run 2 that it's still failing because no touch was found. So let's go ahead and restart our controller. So we'll say yes. Now we're back. Let's go ahead and log in. Let's go back over to Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins. We'll go to Installed, and let's type Pipeline Utility Steps. And we can see now that Pipeline Utility Steps is installed. Let's go back over to our job, Test Pipeline, do a Build Now. We should see number 3 is actually running. We get our list, we have our touch step run, and then we can see that hello text was created after the touch. The Plugin Installation Manager tool is a really, really powerful way for you to manage your plugins for your Jenkins controller. Now in this example, it was fairly contrived, fairly simple. If all you're doing is installing a single plugin, the Jenkins CLI might be a better solution for you. However, when you take the power of the Plugin Installation Manager tool and combine it with JCask, you can come up with a really strong way to define your controllers completely as code and be able to manage your controllers that way going forward and never, more or less, have to go back into the UI to manage your controllers. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBeesDevs. If this video was helpful to you, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on the subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there is new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.